This is my screencast about Strange Meeting. It was written by Owen in 1918. It has heavy use of power rhyme, it's reminiscent of Shelley's Revolt of Islam, and it explores themes of soldiers suffering both emotionally and physically, the hypocrisy of religion condemning soldiers to hell, and the futility of soldiers being sent to death for a war which isn't caused by them. The first 3 lines are used by Owen to sort of set the scene. The idea that it seemed is kind of uncertain, and it shows that you're not really sure whether this is reality or not. The idea of the battle and escaping a battle, it's sort of like salvation. It's something that you should be grateful for and seems like a good thing, but that's juxtaposed with the idea of them being in hell, which you find out later in the poem. So it brings up the question, why is being in hell a good thing? The tunnel, it sort of relates to the idea of a whole tunnel to heaven, or tunnel to hell, like a tunnel of light. But the idea that it's dull, it makes it seem like the afterlife isn't that spectacular. Tunnel also, I thought, could be related to the whole idea of the trenches. The Titanic Wars that Owen talks about doesn't just relate to World War One. It also relates to wars across the ages, which are part of history and some really ancient. So he's linking the past to the present, and it starts to create the idea of a whole cyclical thing of war being a never-ending thing, that's something society really can't get rid of. And the word Titanic really connotes how massive it is and how really earth-shaking these wars are. This links in with the word groined after that, because groins are things that link Roman arches together. So it's the idea of that sort of ancient architecture, and it also relates to Owen's exploration of Roman and ancient myths, along with his interest in the Romantics. Through the first 3 lines, Owen creates a sort of mystery as to where the reader is seeing them, and it prompts the reader to read on to try and find out what's happening. And in the next lines, that's when the reader finds out where they are and the realization that they are in hell. The encumbered sleepers groaned. It gives the impression of sort of a nightmare or burden hanging out over these people. This sort of alludes to the idea of shell shock, which is Owen's own personal experience. The fact that he was plagued with nightmares of his experiences in the war relates really well to the idea of them groaning and being really plagued in their sleep. Owen's mention of death here makes it is the first clue as to what's happening, because so the reader is is sure now that these people are dead, which creates a kind of somber mood to the whole poem, because you didn't realize it'd be that morbid. With the word probed, Owen explores the violation of the dead, because it's very invasive, the idea of it's treating bodies like cadavers and exploring them, and it seems very disrespectful. This whole idea of staring with piteous recognition, it's very creepy because these people are dead, and it makes the reader feel uncomfortable, as with fixed eyes they're kind of zombie-like and not really there conscious, but judging as well with the whole stare, and really piteous, making them seem really pathetic and really sad creatures. As if to bless, it seems it's odd because it's being religion is being juxtaposed in this whole scene of hell, where it's they aren't blessed because they've ended up in hell, and then that's confirmed in Owen's use of the word sullen hall, which reinforces the somber mood, and the word hall kind of relates to I thought of it as Nordic mythology, where they'd be all gods assemble in Odin's hall, which shows that Owen isn't really concentrating on Christian mythology right now. The realization is solidified when the reader finds out that Owen knew we stood in hell. This is also juxtaposed by the idea of the man smiling, which is an odd idea because isn't hell supposed to be a place of torture and punishment, and yet this man seems satisfied when he is occupying hell. The reason for this is revealed to the reader in Owen's description of 1,000 fears on the man's face, the fact that he seems very heavily burdened, and you find out these are burdens that he undertook during his life as a soldier, because he's he's escaping from the blood and the guns and the flues, which Owen describes as no blood reached, no guns thumped, and the flues didn't make a moan. This poem is based on a conversation that Owen has in this imagined world of hell with someone that he's killed, and the first acknowledgement of that is as he addresses his strange friend. That in itself is a paradoxical statement, because as a friend it seems like someone you would know and someone you would be comfortable with, and a stranger is the exact opposite. This is also reflected in the title of it being a strange meeting, which is shown through the fact that he's meeting someone in hell that you later find out that he killed, and it all just seems very overwhelming and ridiculous, giving the idea that it could have been in a dream, or even though it may not have happened in reality, it's something that heavily impacted on Owen. The undone years, described by the person Owen's talking to, undone has two meanings. It could be the not finished years, which is understandable as the man was killed during a war, so he wasn't able to live out his natural life. But it could also mean the ruined years, which fits in with the life that he did have being ruined by war. This is also reflected in the hopelessness he feels, which reflects directly to the poem Futility. Here Owen is trying to convey the idea of being involved in a war that has no purpose, where no one really wins, because both sides have huge deaths and suffer huge losses, and eventually it'll all just happen again in a new war. Owen also draws parallels between the two people, even though you find out later that they're enemies. He creates the idea that both of them are human and therefore they share a bond, but are set as enemies against each other. In the line "My life also," it creates the idea that this man understands Owen and his wants in life and why he joined the war. The word hunting is quite primal and aggressive, and a bit primitive in the idea of Neanderthals hunting and gathering. The wild beauty which the man describes he is hunting could be interpreted in a couple different ways. First of all, it describes how men's desire isn't just in physical aspects. These soldiers, they didn't desire calm in eyes or braided hair. I think they desired the adrenaline of being in war and the grandeur and the prestige of it. But the idea of the wildest beauty also explores Owen's own quest to find beauty in truth. Earlier on is shown through his imitation of the Romantics, but now he's managing to do it in a more subtle way. The mocking the steady running of the hour, I believe it relates to the need for excitement, and which is what led this man to join the war. And the idea that the excitement makes you unappreciative of the life, of the satisfying life you have, which you only appreciate after your time has run out. The truth untold, it relates to a secret that is sprung on soldiers when they realize the reality of war. That is not just what the enlisters tell you, that is not just the glory and the grandeur. It's also the reality of people dying and having to kill other people. With the pity of war, the pity war distilled. The pity of war is obviously the death of the people, but that is pitied in any circumstance where people die. But the fact that it's distilled shows that in war it is concentrated, because so many people die for such a pointless reason, and so therefore the pity is intensified. This again relates back to futility, as though nations trek for progress, showing how through war nations are actually regressing and not making progress in the world. They're just going back to their primitive ways. This is also reflected in this retreating world, which shows again how the world is regressing, and it's a reflection of Owen's commentary on society and war as counter-beneficial. The description of blood clogging the chariot wheels. First of all, the chariot wheels have obvious romantic connotations, as they're Greek and Roman and ancient romanticism. I interpreted that as it being blood and the guilt of blood clogging their conscience, as the guilt of killing someone and survivor's guilt weighs down on people with burdens them. Through that interpretation, you can kind of see it as an emotional aspect of the pain and damage that war inflicts on people. And the idea of sweet wells, I saw sweet words which, try and comfort these people who are struggling to deal with war and their own actions and the effects they've had. The idea of the truth lying... Sorry, my ScreenCast went weird. The idea of the truth lying too deep, it has, again, two connotations. First, that the truth is hidden within people, that they don't want to say it, it's too deep inside themselves because it's too, internal, and people don't share it because it's so personal to themselves. But also that truths lie, with the interpretation of lie being lying to someone. So that it's lies, these truths are actually lies that they tell people to comfort them. This idea of lying, I thought, related quite well to Siegfried Sassoon's poem Hero, with the officers lying to the mother about how valiant their boy was, but I don't know, that's what I thought of. It also kind of relates to Owen's poem The Letter. Owen continues the idea of there being an emotional impact on soldiers when he says foreheads of men have bled where no wounds were, showing how the reader how it's not just physical wounds which soldiers are vulnerable to, that it's also emotional wounds, which I guess is a side of war that really isn't shown, that people don't see if they aren't participating in it. Finally, I am the enemy you killed, my friend. It's kind of the big reveal of the whole thing, where you find out who this person is, whereas throughout most of the poem it was a mystery. The fact that he's an enemy but he's also addressing him as his friend, it shows that outside of war there is no conflict between them, and it reinforces the idea that the conflict is provided by the persons initiating the war, which isn't the soldiers, which aren't the soldiers. The word yesterday, it sort of gives the poem a sort of timeline, because yesterday he killed this man and now he's in hell as well, which means he's dead, showing how death is such a common thing among the soldiers. You also see Owen shows a bit of the brutality of him jabbing and killing the man, and it's also creates huge sympathy as he parries, but his hands were loath and cold, meaning he was already dead before he had the chance to defend himself, which is a truth for so many soldiers, as they're just dispensable to people running wars. The last line, let us sleep now, it creates the idea of camaraderie between them and a sort of comforting between them, welcoming this person to death. And the ellipses at the ends, it makes it seem unfinished and uncertain, just as it did at the beginning, which creates an element of cyclicality, which I think Owen is using to imply that it's just going to be a never-ending cycle of war and death and war and death, and nothing will really be resolved. That's my whole poem. Hope you enjoyed it. I really didn't.